She always called in right on the dot. Didn't matter if it was a routine lunch break or a backup request on the far end of the county, Ashley was steady, precise. That Saturday, her voice came across the radio at 3:47 p.m., like it always did, calm, clear, mile marker 143 code 7 for a meal. But this time, something about the silence after stuck with me, longer than it should have. And by the time I tried raising her again, the static sounded different, like it had weight. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from down in the comments, and if stories like this ever brushed past your town or your life, tap that like and subscribe. Every click helps pull another name out of the dark. My name's Carla Jensen. Back in 1991, I was 48 years old and working dispatch for the Benton County Sheriff's Department. Cedar Falls was the kind of town where folks waved from their porches and left their keys in the ignition while running into the diner. We were good people, maybe a little slow to change, but we looked after each other. My oldest boy had just started college in Springfield, and most of my days passed with quiet mornings police calls and the hum of weather reports in the background. Ashley Rowland was one of ours. She'd been riding the highways on that chrome patrol bike of hers for 8 years, always early to shift uniform, crisp dark hair tucked into a perfect bun. But it wasn't the badge that made folks trust her. It was the way she showed up, really showed up for people. She once bought gas out of pocket for a family stranded with 3 kids in the back seat. Kept tools in her saddlebag, a case of water in the trunk, and jumper cables ready to go. And she never once raised her voice on the job. Not once. That Saturday morning, September 14th, dawned the way September does in Missouri, just warm enough sunlight slicing through the wheat. Ashley checked in around 7:30. Routine patrol. Clear weather. Nothing out of the ordinary. She swung by the front desk like she always did, cracked a smile, mentioned she'd be visiting her parents in Springfield that night. Robert and Marlene still lived in the same little house on Willow Street, the one with the blue porch swing and bird feeders in every window. Her route that day ran her along Highway 287, 60 miles of farmland, 2-lane blacktop, and the kind of quiet that either soothes you or makes you feel a little too alone. She knew every inch of that road, where the deer crossed, which driveways belonged to widows who needed checking in on. She usually stopped for lunch at the Riverside Diner, then coffee at Miller's Station, same as clockwork. I remember her last call like it just happened. Unit 247, Code 7 at marker 143 Riverside Bridge. I logged it, noted the time. 3:47 p.m. She was due to check back in around 4:30, but she never did. At first I thought maybe the radio had glitched. Happens sometimes, especially near the bluffs where reception cuts out. So I gave it 5 minutes, then 10. I called again once, then twice, just static. I asked Sergeant Bradley to try her direct. Nothing. By 6:00 p.m. the sun was going down and 3 cruisers were already out combing that stretch of highway. I stayed on the radio listening harder than I ever had in my life. And that's when I felt it in my gut. Something wasn't right. Ashley wasn't late. Ashley was gone. They reached Riverside Bridge just before nightfall. 3 cruisers' lights, flashing low against the trees, moved slow and steady down the shoulder. Sergeant Bradley coordinated from the lead car windows down radio, murmuring beside him. I was still at dispatch headset pressed to one ear, the room dark except for the soft glow of the control panel. I kept thinking maybe Ashley had laid her bike down and gotten turned around in the brush, maybe twisted an ankle and was working her way back. That would have been the best case. But when they got to mile marker 143, there was nothing. No skid marks, no wreckage, no sign of a crash or struggle, and no sign of Ashley. It was as if she'd radioed in from that spot and then vanished into the air. The patrol team circled back twice. They walked both sides of the road, ran flashlights through the trees, even checked the shallow ditch beneath the bridge where rainwater pooled in spring. Still nothing. I logged every step, every update, and by the time the last call came through that night, I knew something had gone very, very wrong. Word spread faster than we expected. By 7, volunteers were already pulling into the lot outside Miller's Station, farmers in boots, women in aprons, folks still in church clothes from the afternoon service. People brought flashlights, water jugs, extra batteries. One man showed up with a gas-powered lantern and a topographic map he'd unfolded across the hood of his truck. Someone passed around thermoses of coffee. Another brought sandwiches from the Riverside Diner, and just like that, the town was moving. They divided into small groups and headed out into the dark. It was a clear night, stars sharp above the field's air, crisp with the first edge of fall. Some searched the nearby barns and outbuildings. Others drove slowly down dirt roads with brights on. I stayed on the radio until past midnight, marking each search zone as it came back cleared. We thought we'd find her by dawn. We had to. The next morning brought helicopters. State police swept in with aerial support grid mapping the terrain around the bridge. They brought dogs from Camden County, 2 well-trained hounds that picked up a scent near the shoulder only to lose it again after a few hundred yards. It was strange, that sharp stop, as if something had cut the trail clean. By lunchtime, the search perimeter stretched over 20 miles. More than 200 people were on the ground by then, locals, deputies from 3 counties, even a few retired officers who'd once worked with Ashley. The command post we'd set up in Miller's parking lot was running hot clipboards, stacked maps, pinned channels monitored. I remember the sound of the helicopter rotors overhead, steady as a drumbeat echoing through the hills. Every minute mattered in those first 48 hours. Investigators retraced Ashley's steps that day, her 7:30 a.m. weather check-in. Her route down Highway 287, her routine stops. Around 2:30, she'd swung by Miller's like she always did. Mary Chin, the gas station clerk, remembered it clearly. Black coffee, chocolate donut, just like every other Saturday. They'd chatted about the warm weather. Mary said Ashley seemed fine, relaxed, smiling even. Said she mentioned her plan to visit her parents in Springfield after shift. No sign anything was wrong. Around 3:45, a trucker named Bill Santos radioed in later that he thought he'd seen a patrol bike near the bridge. But he'd been headed the other direction, couldn't say for sure. It all lined up, but none of it led anywhere new. We built the timeline anyway. Her final radio call was 3:47. She was supposed to resume patrol by 4:30. That left a gap of 43 minutes. Just 43 minutes in the middle of a normal patrol shift, and she was gone. That window became our focus. Every call, every report, every scrap of information we got circled back to those missing minutes. Cedar Falls isn't the kind of place that takes loss lightly. Within a week, there were prayer vigils every night. The Methodist Church on Main became the center of everything hot meals for searchers' bulletin boards covered in maps and notes, stacks of missing flyers printed with Ashley's photo. Donations poured in from all over Missouri. Local businesses sent supplies. A reward fund reached $25,000 before the month was out. Folks taped signs in shop windows, yellow ribbons on fence posts. She wasn't just a patrol officer. She was one of us. Tips came in like wildfire. A woman in Kansas City swore she saw Ashley at a truck stop restroom. Someone else said they'd seen a patrol bike parked near a rest area outside St. Louis. Psychics called in with visions of water, of trees, of graveyards. The phone rang non-stop. Every call had to be logged and followed up, but none of them went anywhere. Most were false leads or cases of mistaken identity. Some were the kind of thing people call in when they just want to help but don't know how. We couldn't ignore any of them. But chasing ghosts meant pulling people away from the real ground search. And with every passing day, that ground got harder. The terrain out there wasn't easy rolling farmland broken up by deep woods, old quarry trails, overgrown ravines. Some places hadn't seen a human footprint in years. When the rains came in October, they turned the dirt roads to sludge. By November, the snow started. The search scaled back. Not because we gave up, but because we had to. In the middle of it all were Ashley's folks. Robert and Marlene came by the station almost every day. They were both retired school teachers, quiet, proud people. I'd known them since I was a teenager. Robert still carried Ashley's photo in his wallet, the one of her in her academy uniform, smiling, straight-backed sunlight in her eyes. He went out with every volunteer group he could, even with the arthritis in his knees. Marlene kept Ashley's room just the way she'd left it, bed-made, quilt-folded photos on the dresser. Her younger sister Jenna drove down from Kansas City every weekend. Helped with meals, coordinated maps, kept her parents from falling apart. I think what got to everyone most was the lack of anything. No broken glass, no tire tracks, no dropped flashlight or sign of distress. Just an absence, a space where a person should have been. It didn't sit right. Not with any of us. The sheriff's office began considering possible explanations. One theory was mechanical failure. Maybe the bike gave out and she'd walked off-road to find help, gotten injured or lost. Another was medical, some kind of sudden illness, a stroke or fainting spell that left her disoriented. Both would have left clues. But there were none. And then there was the third theory, foul play. We didn't like to say it out loud, but it sat there anyway, heavy and quiet. Ashley had arrested people over the years, given tickets, showed up at scenes others ran from. Maybe someone held a grudge. Maybe someone waited. Or maybe it was worse than that. A fourth theory started circling. That Ashley had run, that she'd left of her own will, disappeared to start over. I never believed it. Neither did anyone who knew her. But when a case goes cold, theories multiply like shadows. By the first anniversary of her disappearance, the town held a memorial at the church. Badge number 247 was officially retired. I remember Marlene standing in the front pew, Ashley's favorite coffee mug clutched to her chest. The congregation sang Amazing Grace. Their voices carried out through the stained glass windows over the cemetery hill behind the church into the trees beyond. And still, no one had found her. But not everyone was ready to let it rest. Not even close. Because in the spring of '93, a new detective transferred into Benton County, and he brought with him questions none of us had dared ask before. Detective Michael Torres transferred into the department in April of '93. I remember the day he showed up at the station. Quiet suit jacket still creased from the road eyes that scanned the room like they were already cataloging exits and stories. Word was he'd come from Kansas City, 15 years on homicide, the kind of experience you didn't usually see in a rural department like ours. He'd asked for a cold case assignment, not because of the work hours or the scenery, but because of something personal. No one said it outright at first, but I'd heard enough to know he'd lost someone, a brother, back in '87. That case was never solved. When he picked up Ashley's file, it wasn't with ceremony. He just took it from the shelf, walked back to his office, and started reading. First report to last, day by day. Every note, every diagram, every marked and unmarked map. Didn't say much that first week, but you could feel it. He wasn't just reviewing. He was looking for something we'd missed. Over the next few months, Torres spent long hours retracing the case. I'd see him out at the bridge before sunrise, parked off the shoulder, standing near the rail with a notebook in his hand. Sometimes he'd go over the same stretch of road 2 or 3 times in one day, like he was trying to see it from a different angle. He started pulling old call logs from other counties looking for similar cases that might have slipped through the cracks. I remember he had a corkboard in his office that kept filling up maps, names red string connecting places that didn't seem connected until he laid them out. That's when he found something. 2 other missing persons cases, both from the same corridor of Highway 287. Dale Hoffman, a rancher who disappeared in '89. Gary Peterson, a salesman last seen in '90. Both vanished during daylight hours. Both traveling alone. Both last known locations within 10 miles of Riverside Bridge. At first it seemed like coincidence. But Torres kept digging. He pulled their reports, compared weather logs, traffic flow, even soil composition along their likely routes. I helped when I could, ran archive requests, cross-checked call times, pulled dispatch tapes from back when we still used reel-to-reel. He never said it directly, but I could tell where his thoughts were heading. If Ashley had been the only one, maybe it was an isolated tragedy. But 3 disappearances spaced out like that in the same narrow radius, that started to feel like something else. He mapped out the last known points for all 3, and what he showed me one afternoon caught me off guard. The locations formed a rough triangle, and at the center was Riverside Bridge. When Torres tried to bring the pattern to the sheriff's attention, he got polite nods, but not much more. Resources were tight. Most of the department was already stretched thin working current cases. After 7 years without a body, or suspect Ashley's file was to them background noise. Something sad. Something shelved. I don't think anyone said it outright, but there was a quiet belief forming that maybe the truth had just gotten lost to time. Torres didn't buy that. He kept showing up early, kept logging his hours. But most of the real work started happening off the books. He asked around town gently at first. A few folks were willing to talk, mostly those who'd been involved in the original search, but others grew tight-lipped the moment Ashley's name came up. I remember the way conversations would shift when Torres walked into the diner, how the older men by the window would go quiet, then resume in low murmurs once he passed. At first, he chalked it up to small-town suspicion, outsider with too many questions. But it started to wear on him. People weren't just uninterested, they were avoiding him. Some warned him even phrases like, "best to let it be," and "not everything out here needs digging up." He told me once that it felt like hitting a wall made of fog, couldn't see who was behind it, but knew someone was there. One evening over coffee in the break room, he mentioned the old Mackenzie property. Said it had come up in conversations more than once, always with a sideways glance. Abandoned ranch 10 miles from the bridge. Place had been empty since the late 80s after Ezra Mackenzie passed. Torres had heard the usual rural ghost stories, strange lights, odd machinery noises, visitors at strange hours, but what caught his attention was how often people mentioned it without being asked. As if it were a boundary marker, an answer they weren't willing to give but kept circling around. So he went out there. The ranch sat on 2,000 acres of rough hills and ravines. The main house had burned down years earlier, just a stone foundation and a brick chimney left standing. A couple of outbuildings still remained barn with a sagging roof, storage sheds mostly collapsed under their own weight. Torres poked through them carefully. Nothing unusual at first. Rusted tools, animal scat. A few bottles half buried in straw. But it was the quiet that struck him. A kind of stillness that didn't feel entirely empty. He came back the next day with a camera and a notepad documented everything. Made plans to request proper search permissions. But when he brought the proposal to the department equipment ground-penetrating radar, even a drone flyover it got shelved. Budget, they said. No active threat. No warrant. The property was still tied up in probate with distant relatives, and anything beyond a walk-around would require legal footing. Torres offered to fund part of it himself. The answer didn't change. That's when I knew he wasn't going to let it go. He started using his own weekends, drove out there alone, talked to old-timers who'd lived near the Mackenzie line back in the day, found a couple who remembered seeing headlights out there long after Ezra had died. Another man mentioned that the machinery noises generators maybe had stopped around the same time Ashley disappeared. It wasn't solid evidence, but it was enough to raise questions. Back at the station, people started calling him obsessed. Said he'd gone tunnel-visioned. His wife stopped by one day, asked if we'd seen him. Said he talked more about Ashley than he did about their own kids. I didn't know what to tell her. Some cases get under your skin like that. And this one had already lived under ours for years. By the winter of '94, the department was pulling Torres off cold cases entirely. His captain told him to focus on recent incidents, burglaries, drug cases, anything with a clear lead and a close date. But I still saw him most mornings, sifting through maps, printing out weather reports from 7 years ago. He started keeping a second notebook just for off-the-record notes, the kind of thoughts you don't want to forget but also can't quite explain yet. Then one morning in early '95, he asked me something different. He wanted geological records, soil reports, drainage maps. Said he was trying to figure out how far a motorcycle could move if it were swept downstream, maybe by spring floods in that part of the county. I didn't know it yet, but that one question would end up opening the next door, one that had been waiting just out of sight for 7 long years. Torres started coming in earlier. He'd be at his desk before the sun was up, shuffling through stacks of topo maps and weather logs from the early '90s. He'd scribble something down, cross it out, lean back, then start again. You could tell his mind wasn't quiet, not even for a minute. That question about drainage had opened something up in him. It wasn't just about where Ashley might have gone. It was about how the land itself might have worked against us. Rivers run off soft shoulders where a tire could slide just enough. He wasn't chasing ghosts, he was chasing terrain. And he wasn't alone. That spring, a local geology student from the community college, Kevin Walsh, offered to help. Kid couldn't have been older than 22, polite, as they come wiry frame, walked like someone used to hiking hills. Said he'd seen Torres's name in the paper and thought he could assist with the mapping side of things. Torres brought him into the station the next day, introduced him like someone bringing a second wind. Kevin had access to newer software stuff that could generate 3D elevation overlays and floodplain modeling. He pulled up records on seasonal runoff going back decades, showed how spring rains might have carried debris from the bridge all the way into lower ravines west of the main road areas we'd never touched because they weren't technically part of the original search grid. His overlays highlighted 3 zones where sediment buildup would likely trap heavy objects. 2 of them were on private land. The third followed an old cattle trail that hadn't been used since the '80s. Torres stared at that screen for a long time, then pointed to a spot about 2 miles downstream from mile marker 143. "That's where we start," he said. By May of 1998, the weather had shifted. Rainy season was tapering off, and the worst of the summer heat hadn't kicked in yet. It was the first time in years we had the right conditions and the right direction. Torres didn't wait on official clearance. He pulled together volunteers from the old search teams, retired deputies, locals who still carried Ashley's photo in their wallets. Jenna Rowland came down from Kansas City to help, same as she always had. Marlene stayed behind that time. Said she'd wait at home. Couldn't do another fruitless march through the brush, not after so many. I stayed on the comms that weekend, logging each team's quadrant, making sure no one doubled back without a check-in. Kevin handed out copies of his map, laminated in plastic routes marked with red grease pencil and coded for drainage priority. You'd have thought we were coordinating a military op, not a search party. But there was a different energy this time. Quiet, focused, no one asking what if. Just moving forward. They started just after sunrise, 20 people spread out across the lower basin, metal detectors in hand. Torres led a group into one of the deeper ravines where runoff from the hilltop curled down in a soft V. Most of the brush was thigh-high by then, thick with prairie grass and thornweed. Hours passed, one false ping after another, beer cans, hubcaps, a broken lawnmower blade, nothing that meant anything. Around 2 o'clock, I heard the call come in over the two-way. It was Jim Caldwell, a retired state trooper who'd driven in from out past Warsaw. His voice was low, steady. Said he'd found something metallic under a pile of debris, chrome bars, maybe handlebars. Location matched one of Kevin's high sediment zones. Torres reached him first. I wasn't there when they uncovered it, but I remember how the room felt when the call came through. Still, like someone had pulled the sound out of the air. The bike was buried halfway in the mud, caught in the tangle of root systems and rotted branches. Prairie grass had grown through the spokes, wildflowers blooming up through the seat like nature hadn't waited for anyone to come looking. It was her patrol motorcycle. Same plates, same frame, still intact, though battered. Not in the way a crash would leave it. No twisting, no torn rubber, no glass. Torres said later it looked like it had been placed there, lowered carefully. Set down, not thrown. Her helmet was found nearby, cracked but not crushed, the strap still latched. There were no skid marks on the ridge above. No sign she'd come over the edge at speed. For 7 years, we'd told ourselves maybe she'd veered off-road by mistake. Maybe there'd been a blowout, a medical episode, a deer in the road. Something sudden, something senseless. But what we found down there didn't look like an accident. It looked like someone had moved her bike and left it there to be swallowed up by the floodplain. Torres had it extracted piece by piece, cataloged on site. Then it was loaded onto a flatbed and taken straight to the state crime lab in Jefferson City. He rode with it the whole way, didn't want to let it out of his sight. Forensics confirmed what we already suspected. The damage to the frame wasn't consistent with a crash. Paint scrapes showed side contact, not forward impact. No trace of her blood, no fabric fibers on the bars or tank. More curious still, certain components had been removed, parts that could be resold or stripped for value. Not random ones. Selected. That, more than anything, told Torres what he needed to know. Someone had tampered with that bike. Not just hidden it, but handled it with time and purpose. There were fingerprints, partials mostly, nothing usable. But then came the final detail. Behind the inner lining of Ashley's helmet, wedged deep under the foam padding, was a small piece of paper. Water-damaged, curled from heat and age. Faded ink, but still legible. Torres called me that night after they found it. He didn't speak right away. Just breathed on the line for a second like he was trying to put it into words that made sense. The note was handwritten. Block letters rushed. It read, "If found, check old mine shaft." And beneath that, A.M., Ashley's initials. She had written it. 7 years after we lost her, she was speaking back. Not in theory, not in speculation, but directly. A message we'd never expected. One she must have left in a moment of desperation or clarity or both. All at once, the entire shape of the mystery shifted. This wasn't just a disappearance. This wasn't someone vanishing without a trace. This was a message from someone who had survived something and had tried to lead us to where she'd gone. And now the question wasn't what happened back then. It was, had we been close all along? Close enough to hear her if we'd only known where to listen. The paper felt old in a way that went beyond the water damage. The ink had bled along the folds, but the letters held. Torres had that note under glass within the hour, logged, photographed, backed up 3 times. If found, check old mine shaft. A.M. We didn't know how she'd managed it, maybe tucked behind the liner while the helmet was off, maybe in the dark by feel alone. What mattered was that it came from her. Not from a theory or from a timeline. From Ashley herself. And suddenly, we had a direction. Torres pulled the mineral rights maps from county records and started cross-referencing them with topographic surveys. There were 6 documented mine shafts in the region around mile marker 143, all decommissioned between 1958 and 1972. One stood out immediately, an abandoned copper shaft, just under a half-mile west of where the motorcycle was found. Listed in the archives as inactive since 1964, last inspected in 76, noted as unstable and sealed. But sealed didn't mean inaccessible. Not after 3 decades of weather erosion and neglect. Torres moved fast. He looped in the Missouri Mine Rescue Unit, requested a small team for structural assessment, brought in 2 EMTs from County Fire. He asked me to help file the search warrant paperwork for the Mackenzie tract since the shaft technically sat on that land. I remember the judge raising an eyebrow when he saw the age of the case, but he signed it without question. Once Torres showed him the photo of the helmet note. We were on site the next morning by 9 a.m. The mine entrance was choked with deadfall saplings, grown wild rocks piled by time and wind, but the original timbers were still visible beneath. Torres was the first one in after the safety team cleared it. The air inside was stale, touched with metal and old water. The beam from his headlamp cut a narrow cone through decades of dust. About 40 feet in, they found it. A hollow carved into the side shaft, maybe once used as a tool bay or storage recess. There was no body, no blood. But there were signs of life. Sleeping bags worn thin at the edges, cans of soup with expiration dates from 1990, empty water jugs stacked neatly along the far wall. In the corner, a folded tarp covered a pile of equipment. Beneath it lay Ashley's police radio. The batteries were long dead corroded white along the terminals, but the serial number matched her gear log. The handle had worn smooth from use. There were signs someone had lived there, not camped, but stayed, long enough to set things in order, long enough to form a routine. There were torn pages from a first aid manual, 3 rolls of gauze, and a pair of boots too small for most men, but too large for a child. On the heel of one, Torres found the initials AR scratched into the rubber with what looked like a utility blade. His hands shook when he held it up to the light. He didn't speak for a full minute. They cataloged everything, bagged it, boxed it, ran it through chain of custody. I logged every item into the system myself. What wasn't logged but stayed with all of us was the way the place felt. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a record of endurance, a space made habitable by someone determined to survive. The walls had faint smudges where hands had rested. Dust had settled in lines along the bedding, but the shape of it told a story of movement, of getting up, lying back down. Then, near the bedding, under a rusted pot, they found the journal. It was a simple, spiral-bound notebook, the kind you'd buy in a drugstore. Water-stained edges curled some pages fused by moisture, but enough remained intact. The writing inside was hers, verified by Marlene later. The same hand that had written birthday cards, grocery lists, little notes in the margins of her sister's school planners. The entries were dated starting September 14th, 1991. The first few pages described what happened that day, how the motorcycle lost power near the bridge, how she heard a vehicle approaching behind her but couldn't identify it. She mentioned pain in her side, possibly a cracked rib, maybe more. She'd crawled into the brush to get out of view. That night she found the mine by following a dry runoff path. She thought she'd rest there until morning, then try for the road. But by day 3, she couldn't walk more than 20 feet without dizzy spells. She stayed, made do with what was in her kit. Her entries were methodical at first, detailing food rations, water storage, radio attempts. She'd climb out early in the morning to listen for traffic to try the radio again from higher ground. She wrote about how quiet it was, about the sound of birds fading with each day, the echo of her own breathing against the rock. By the second week, her writing changed. Fewer words, spaced farther apart. She described dreams, flickers of light she wasn't sure were real footsteps she thought she heard and then didn't. She began ending each entry with the same phrase, "Keep trying." On October 7th, 23 days after her last radio call, she wrote her final message. Someone's coming, finally going home. After that, the pages were blank. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no discarded remains. It was as if whoever she heard, whoever had come, had either taken her out or arrived too late. Torres had the surrounding woods searched again, top to bottom. Dogs, thermal imaging, ground radar. Nothing. Every trace of her from that point on was gone. We debated whether she might have died out there, body mist in the undergrowth, but the order of her belongings said otherwise. Her gear had been packed, her journal stored inside a dry metal toolbox, protected. The firewood was stacked, not scattered. If she died there, it wasn't in chaos. For weeks, Torres didn't let the case go. Not at night, not on weekends. He drove to every nearby emergency clinic, hospital, private practice, any place that might have treated a woman with injuries matching Ashley's description in October of '91. And that's when the next piece fell. Late December, an elderly rancher by the name of Bill Morrison walked into the station. Said he'd heard something on the radio about Ashley's journal being found. He looked tired, worn, but certain. Claimed he'd picked up an injured woman from the edge of his property in the fall of '91, not long after the first frost. She was wearing torn pants, a dark shirt with some kind of badge or patch on it. Said she was quiet, barely awake. He drove her to County General, an hour away, closest place open that night. Didn't get a name. Didn't ask. Figured she'd be listed somewhere. But he never saw her again. Torres took the report seriously. Had him point to the spot on a map. It lined up roughly 5 miles from the mine. Morrison said he never heard back, figured the hospital logged her as a Jane Doe. But when Torres pulled records from County General, they were incomplete. Files from late 1991 were missing. No intake logs, no ER charts. A system update in 1995 had supposedly wiped part of the database. When he asked for backups, the administrator said they no longer existed. Staff had changed over. No one remembered her. No one recalled a woman matching Ashley's description. But Morrison remembered. And that made all the silence feel different. Not random, not accidental. It made us wonder if someone had found her. Why didn't they tell us? And what had she become to them that they wanted to keep hidden? Torres didn't say anything at first. He just laid the printed report down on my desk, tapped the corner once with his finger, and waited for me to read. County General Hospital, October 1991. Electronic records incomplete. Physical logs marked archived, no longer accessible. I looked at the line where the intake sheet should have listed a female trauma patient. Instead, there was a blank. Just a date, a time, and then a handwritten note that said, "File in overflow." But when Torres called the administrator to ask where overflow was stored, they told him it had been destroyed, part of a system upgrade back in '95. Accidental loss, they said. Nothing suspicious. No one could explain why only that 2-week window had vanished or why several logbooks from the ER desk were missing from storage altogether. They blamed mold, water damage, reorganization, excuses that on paper might have worked. But Torres had been a detective too long to believe in coincidence that clean. He started running the names of staff from that year, doctors, nurses, night orderlies. The turnover was high and most had moved on. A few were retired, some deceased, some unreachable. He managed to speak to 2 people who remembered the night Morrison claimed he brought the woman in. One, a nurse named Dana, now living in Arkansas, said she vaguely recalled someone arriving late, confused, dirty, possibly injured, but she hadn't been assigned to that case. The other, a night tech named Ellis, said he didn't remember much about the patient, but he did remember someone telling him not to ask questions. Said it wasn't a good idea to press that she'd already been taken care of. That phrase stuck with Torres. It wasn't medical. It wasn't procedural. It sounded like someone trying to close a door before anyone knew it had been opened. He asked who had been on call that night. The name that came up was Dr. Adrian Keene, a trauma physician under contract at the time. Keene had since moved out of state, opened a private clinic in Colorado. Torres sent 2 requests for interview. Both were declined. When he finally reached Keene by phone, the doctor's tone shifted the moment Ashley's name was mentioned. First he claimed he didn't remember the case. Then he said the hospital had strict confidentiality policies even for patients with no listed name. Then he hung up. What complicated everything further was that County General wasn't publicly run. It was owned by a private healthcare group, one that had ties to regional donors and local politicians. Back in the late '80s, that hospital had received substantial funding through a development initiative chaired by a state representative from our district, someone with family land not far from Riverside Bridge. I won't name him here. Not because it isn't part of the record, but because no official charges were ever filed, and what we had at the time was circumstantial. Torres wasn't the kind of man to throw accusations without proof, but I could see it weighing on him, that quiet pattern of access, the way powerful people seemed to vanish just beyond reach, the way records always stopped short of showing us the full picture. Meanwhile, Marlene kept calling the station every few days, asking what we'd found. If we'd confirmed it was Ashley in the mine, if we thought she'd really made it out. I told her what I could, that the journal was real, that the handwriting matched, that the boot had her initials carved into the heel. She asked about the hospital next, if we believed she'd been treated there, if someone had seen her. I didn't know how to answer. What I wanted to say was, yes, I think she was there. I think someone saw her, patched her up, and then helped her disappear. But helped can mean a lot of things. It can mean shelter, or silence, or something worse. Torres kept digging. He checked property transfers within a 50-mile radius in the 6 months following October 1991, looked for names tied to shell companies, rapid deeds, private transfers with no listed price. He found 3. One of them was for a hunting cabin up near Clearwater Lake. The sale had gone through a holding company based in St. Louis, but the original owner, Dr. Adrian Keene. The buyer. A company that on paper had no employees, no office, and no listed phone number, just a P.O. box. Torres drove up there, sat outside the cabin for 3 hours. It was empty, boarded, no utilities registered in over a decade. But in the logbook, kept at the county assessor's office, someone had signed in for seasonal tax payments every year from 92 to 97, always in person, always in spring. The signature was just initials, A.M. He had the page scanned enlarged and laid it next to the helmet note and the journal. Same slant, same sharp crossbar on the A, same open loop on the M. Torres didn't call it conclusive. He called it enough. Enough to suggest that Ashley might have survived. That maybe someone had helped her disappear, whether for protection or control, we didn't yet know. What made it worse was that we'd been so close, that if someone had spoken up even a year earlier, we might have gotten her home. In early 1999, Torres asked the department for permission to reopen the case formally. He wanted subpoena power. He wanted access to sealed financials phone records, anything that could link the cabin or the hospital to someone local. The request was denied. Too many years, they said. Too few resources. Public interest had shifted. The phrase they used was no prosecutable angle. He kept working anyway, off hours. Logged interviews in a second notebook. I saw him less after that. He started driving out of county more often, said he needed to follow something in person, not on paper. His wife filed for separation that spring. Said she couldn't live in the shadow of a case that had taken everything but the title deed. The last time I saw him, he left a copy of the mine photos on my desk. Said he didn't want them ending up in the wrong file drawer. There was one image that still sticks with me. The sleeping bag pulled tight across the floor, the police radio beside it, and next to that, stacked neatly, were 3 books, a paperback dictionary, a Bible, and a field manual on emergency signaling, all worn, all used, all placed where someone might reach for them in the dark, over and over. That was the last physical trace we ever found. No remains, no confirmed sightings. Just that rising sense that the further we pushed, the more people pulled away. Folks who'd once been willing to talk now changed the subject when Ashley's name came up. Some said it was too painful. Others said it was time to let go. But Torres believed someone in this town knew the end of the story, that it wasn't buried in a file or swept away by floodwater. That it was still alive, just kept quiet behind the closed doors of a hospital, or the silence of a back porch, or the weight of a secret passed down by someone who thought they were protecting more than just a name. The year Torres retired, the badge on his desk was still the one they'd pulled from Ashley's file. He never asked for a replacement, didn't want one. The walls of his office were bare when he left, except for one printout still thumbtacked behind the door, a copy of Ashley's last known patrol route, with 3 red circles drawn in permanent marker. I remember standing in that room the day after he packed up. The station was quiet. Phones were ringing 2 rooms away, someone was typing behind the glass, but the quiet in there was different. It had weight, like something had been cut loose and nobody had the nerve to say it out loud. He hadn't found her. Not fully. Not the way he wanted to. But what he left behind was something deeper than an ending. It was a wound no one could bandage over. And that wound didn't just belong to us. It belonged to the town. Cedar Falls started changing. Not suddenly, not in any dramatic way. But if you paid attention, you noticed the hush that followed certain names. Ashley Rowland, Michael Torres, even the Mackenzie property. People who'd once offered casseroles and search maps now just avoided eye contact when they passed the sheriff's cruiser downtown. Some neighbors' folks who used to leave their porch lights on after dark in case Ashley came home started keeping them off altogether. There were whispers, always had been. But now they moved quieter, closer to the ground. You'd hear bits in the grocery store aisle. Fragments. She wasn't supposed to make it out, or that place wasn't just empty, or it's better left where it is. You'd turn your head and the voices would vanish. The Mackenzie property sat untouched for years after, still unclaimed, still sealed off. The access road had overgrown again. Every so often, someone would say they'd seen a truck parked there after midnight or lights moving through the brush. One hunter claimed he heard a woman's voice echoing down from the trees near the old mine shaft. Said it didn't sound right, not panicked, not crying, just talking. Like she didn't know anyone was listening. No one took it seriously, not officially. But the story made its way around. By then, anything that hinted at Ashley's presence, real or imagined, carried its own strange gravity. Then there was the cabin, the one Torres had traced through the shell company. A year after his retirement, someone set fire to it. It didn't make the paper. Rural structure deemed accidental, no injuries. But when I heard about it, I drove up myself. Stood on the gravel pull-off, watched the blackened board still smoking in places, sap crackling from a split beam near the foundation. There were no tire tracks, no footprints, no fresh documents filed with the county. It was like it had been erased before anyone had a chance to ask why it was there in the first place. That spring, a new deputy transferred in from the next county. Young, clean uniform full of questions. He asked me about Ashley one afternoon during shift overlap. Said he'd heard a version of the story back in academy. I asked him what version he'd heard. He said, the one where she was alive for weeks and they left her there anyway. I didn't say anything. He looked at me for a while, then added, they said she knew something she wasn't supposed to. I think that's what made people nervous. Not just that Ashley had survived the initial disappearance, but that she might have seen something, heard something. That the truth she carried didn't die in those woods and didn't fade in the hospital hallway, but went on. Somewhere. Maybe in the form of that journal. Maybe in whatever had happened after that final entry. The one that ended with someone's coming. Finally going home. There's a part of me that believes she did get out. That she stood under the stars again. That someone put a blanket around her shoulders or offered her water or gave her a name that wasn't hers and said, you're safe now. But safe from what or from who? That's the question we never stopped circling, because if someone helped her vanish, it meant they had something to lose by letting her be found. Torres kept in touch for a little while, sent updates from time to time. Said he'd gotten close to a whistleblower at the hospital, but the man had passed before giving a full statement. Said a box of old security logs had been pulled from storage but was missing its key tapes. Last I heard, he'd moved down near the border, built a workshop behind his house, spent most of his days alone. He never said goodbye. The Mitchells, Robert and Marlene, carried on in the only way they knew how. Robert passed in 2001. Marlene still lived in the house on Willow Street the last time I drove by. The porch looked the same. So did the quilt in the window. When I saw her at the grocery store a few months back, she smiled at me. Asked how the station was holding up. Didn't ask about the case, just touched my hand lightly when we parted. Said, tell them she mattered. I said I would. And I'm telling you now, she did. She does. Some stories don't end with a trial or a headline. Some stories stay open not because no one's looking, but because the answers have been folded so deep into silence that pulling them out would mean unspooling everything around them. The land, the people, the history. Maybe that's why folks turned away. Not because they didn't care, but because they were afraid of what caring too loudly might reveal. But then there's that photo. The one that surfaced 2 years ago in a missing persons forum online. Blurry, low resolution, taken outside a pharmacy in Arkansas. A woman in her 60s looking over her shoulder, hand raised like she's about to wave. The hair's longer, streaked with gray. But the eyes, those same sharp eyes. Someone had posted it alongside the caption, "Saw this woman near Little Rock." Said her name was Anne. But I swear I've seen her face before. The moderators removed the post within 24 hours. Said it violated privacy guidelines. I saved a copy before it disappeared. Printed it out. It's in my drawer. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a case of mistaken identity. Or maybe not. What I know is this: when a woman disappears and leaves behind a journal, a boot, a message scrawled in her own hand, those things don't just vanish. They echo. Through the mine, through the files, through the people who can't quite bring themselves to speak the last piece aloud. And somewhere, if she's out there, I hope she knows. We never stopped listening. I kept the photo in a drawer right beneath the stapler and the old shift rosters from '92. Never showed it to anyone at first, not because I didn't think it mattered, but because I didn't know what to do with it. The woman in the picture wasn't posing. She wasn't smiling. She was walking out of a pharmacy, hand raised halfway like she'd just waved to someone out of frame. Her clothes were plain, hair pulled back, and the look on her face, even blurry, held something I hadn't seen in over a decade, a kind of calm that didn't match the weight we'd carried since the day she vanished. I compared it against the patrol photos we still had Ashley by her bike, Ashley at the department awards ceremony, Ashley on a fishing trip with her dad. Same jawline, same brows, same set to the shoulders. The forum post that shared it didn't mention Missouri. It just said, "Little Rock, late March, outside a Walgreens." The caption was vague. "This woman looks so familiar. Anyone recognize her?" The replies were the usual guesses, names, half memories, a few rude jokes. Then it was gone, flagged and pulled, too fast to be accidental. I printed the image and drove out to see Marlene. She was sitting on the porch, the air warm enough for the hummingbirds to be back. I hadn't warned her I was coming. Just parked by the curb and walked up with the envelope in my coat pocket. When I handed it to her, she didn't speak for a long time. Just kept her eyes on the picture, one hand resting over the corner like it might blow away. Then she said, "It looks like her, but different." I nodded. That was all I could say. She didn't ask where I'd gotten it. She just folded it once, carefully, and placed it inside her Bible. After that, I started calling around again. Quietly. Not reopening the case, just asking questions. A few retired investigators still picked up. Most didn't. I found a contact down in Arkansas, former law enforcement, now running private security. He agreed to look into pharmacy camera logs, but by then the trail was cold. No saved footage. No receipt that matched the time. No name tied to any transaction from that hour. It could have been nothing. Or it could have been someone who knew how to move without leaving prints. I don't know what I expected. A breakthrough, a voicemail. Maybe a letter postmarked from a town I'd never heard of, but nothing came. Just the silence I'd grown used to. Familiar, but heavier now. Because even with the photo, even with the journal, even with all the things Torres had risked, there was still no conclusion. No body, no confession, no apology. And that's when the tapes showed up, anonymously, delivered in a plain manila envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front said only one thing: for the one who stayed. Inside were 3 cassette tapes, standard Maxell blanks labeled AM, 1, 2, and 3. No dates, no location, just the initials. We didn't even have a working deck in the station anymore. I had to dig one out of my basement and bring it in. I locked the door, shut the blinds, and pressed play. The first voice was hers. Older, a little rough around the edges, but unmistakable. She said her name at the beginning, full name: Ashley Marie Rowland. Then a pause. Then she said, "If you're hearing this, it means I made it far enough to be forgotten, or far enough that I stopped trying to be found." The room went still. No ambient noise behind her, just the low buzz of an old mic and the hum of quiet breath between sentences. She talked about the mine, about the injury, about the days she counted by tearing strips of cloth from her undershirt and hanging them like markers, about hearing voices that never got close enough, about the night she left October 7th, the same date as the journal's final entry. She said she'd waited until the moon was high, said something had shifted in the silence, that she finally believed whoever was near wouldn't hurt her, and if they did, it didn't matter anymore. The second tape was harder to follow, more fragmented, less structured. She spoke about a man who helped her but never gave his name, said he had a truck with Kansas plates and eyes that never looked her in the face. He brought her to a woman, older, calm, maybe a nurse, maybe something else. They gave her food, cleaned her wounds, and told her she wasn't safe to go back. That people had already decided how her story should end. That if she reappeared, it wouldn't be a rescue, it would be a reckoning. They didn't explain further, just told her it was better to start over. She said she didn't believe them. Not at first, but her body was weak and her hope was bent in too many directions. So she listened. The third tape was different. Slower, more deliberate. She talked about watching her father's obituary appear in a small-town paper she wasn't supposed to read, about seeing Torres's name in a local segment on unsolved cases, about catching her own reflection in a shop window and not recognizing who she was anymore. Then she said something that still plays in my head late at night. She said, "Sometimes survival is a kind of agreement. You let go of what you loved, and in return they let you live." Another pause. Then, "But I never stopped listening. And I hope you didn't either. No contact information, no location, no request, just those tapes, mailed to the station, for me. Or for someone like me. And whoever sent them knew the case file was still in the back of the archive cabinet. Knew I still came in 2 days a week to handle records. Knew I hadn't stopped asking questions. The handwriting on the envelope was clean practiced, but the way the M curled at the end, it matched the final page of her journal. We ran the envelope for prints. Nothing. Asked the post office to trace origin. No forwarding data. No camera footage from the Dropbox. We even tried tracking the batch number on the cassettes. The company hadn't manufactured that model in over a decade. So I made copies. Sent one set to Marlene. One to Torres, wherever he is now. I don't know what either of them did after that. But I know what I did. I locked the originals in a fireproof case, marked the label Unresolved 247, and placed it right back into the cabinet. And this time I left the drawer open. The tapes were never meant to explain everything. I think I understand that now. For a while I kept listening over and over, hoping a detail would shift or a phrase would sound different with time. But they stayed the same. Her voice low, steady, deliberate, never cracked, never rushed, as if she'd made peace with what she'd lost and knew that whoever found the tapes needed something quieter than answers. I never took them home, just visited the cabinet when I needed to. Sometimes early in the morning, sometimes after dark when the building was empty. I kept waiting for a call to come in a note, another envelope. But nothing followed. Not for weeks. Not for months. Torres did write back, though. Just a short letter. He thanked me for the copy, said he'd listened with the blinds shut and the front porch light off. Said he cried once during the part where she talked about the man who drove without asking questions. That was all. No return address. No phone number. But I could tell the handwriting had steadied since the last time I'd seen it. Like he was still grieving but not drowning anymore. Marlene called me on a Sunday afternoon. Said she'd decided to move. Smaller place closer to her sister. She didn't sound sad. She asked if I could help her pack a few boxes, and when I showed up, the photo from the pharmacy was already framed on the wall. She didn't mention it, and I didn't ask. Just carried her books out to the car and watched the porch light flicker for the last time. As for me, I stayed. Not because I thought something else would come, just because this is where it all happened. Where she grew up, where she left, where she was nearly erased. I kept the old file in the drawer with the tapes, updated the label to say, "Closed by witness, not by law." The chief let it be. Some nights I think about that phrase she used, survival, as an agreement, letting go of what you loved so they'd let you live. I don't know if I could have made that deal, but she did. And I respect it now in a way I didn't at first. Not everything broken needs to be put back in place. Sometimes it just needs to be remembered clearly. So that's what I do. I remember. The way she used to tap her pen on the desk when she was thinking. The way her laugh came from her chest, not her throat. The way she looked when she first pinned her badge to that worn department jacket, proud, not for herself, but for what it meant to show up. If you've stayed through this story, thank you. Not every case ends in justice. Some just end. But the telling matters. Saying the names out loud matters. If this stayed with you, maybe tell someone else. So no one disappears in silence. So we remember what it costs to be found.